Hello and welcome to the Courageous Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Joanna Howes, and on today's show, we have the brilliant Claire Holland. Claire is CEO of Mullen Lowe. She is an agency leader focused on creativity, growth, and change management, and has a reputation for being an honest, creative, and collaborative leader that puts people and culture first. Let's get started. Claire, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Nice, isn't it? Just sitting here, getting a nice little chat.
Quite a nice escape.
But I do dive in very quick with quite a big question. I'd love to know, this being the Courageous Leaders podcast, what's a courageous moment for you to date?
I think probably I'm going to go right back to the start, actually. And I think probably one of the most courageous moments for me was actually making a decision to leave med school. And it was a really big decision at the time because I think I'd spent obviously a huge amount of my school time, getting the grades and doing the right courses and getting into med school. And it was a path, and it was like, it was almost like off I went and that was going to be my career. And to get into kind of the first term and have this real realization of, I actually just don't think I want this enough. And being honest with myself around that was really quite a big decision. I did the first year, did all of the exams, passed them, and much to the surprise of the med school, actually left and went off to do a geography degree. And the first thing everybody said is, well, what are you going to do with a geography degree? And I didn't know. And that was a real moment of vulnerability because I'd gone from this very kind of crystal clear, this is a path, to I don't know, but actually that's okay. And I think it really defined me, actually, in terms of kind of really trusting my gut and my instinct and knowing that actually a leap of faith, not knowing where it's going to go, if it feels right, do it. So yeah, I think it was, I was only 18, but I think it probably has defined a lot of who I am today, even now.
I like that. You're like, what comes into play now with it in terms of, I suppose, that gut instinct in leadership? How does that play out for you, being able to leave medicine, which, as you say, was a really secure path?
I think it's taught me to back myself. And I think actually, in truth, in the early stages of my career, I felt I spent a lot of time wanting to prove that I made the right decision. And I sort of feel like I've moved on from that almost now. I sort of have done that bit. But that's also been a real journey that I've been through, I think. And I feel like I no longer need to prove to anybody what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. But that, I think, has been a bit of a journey of self-discovery in itself as well.
Okay, I'm going to dig into that.
Yeah.
My story is needing to prove myself because I didn't get many GCSEs, didn't get any A-levels, so obviously didn't get a degree. And my whole drive and my whole thing was, I need to prove myself. I need to prove I'm smart enough. I need to prove I deserve to be here. Can you talk us through, because I know there's a lot of people with that story. How did you let go of that? When did it become okay not to feel you needed to prove yourself anymore?
Yeah, it's so funny because I think lots of people have this kind of sense of needing to prove themselves. I don't know if there was a defining moment, if I'm really honest. I think what I did know was when I did fall into advertising, and I think, to be honest, it sort of found me as much as I found it, was I did know that I'd found something I really loved and that I was really good at. And it was the first time, I think, that I really understood that creativity and business could come together. And for me, that was this kind of mind-blowing moment of, this is, for me, I've really found something that I love. I think it was probably when I got more into the sort of a proper leadership role at AMV, probably when I actually took on the department and was running, at the time about 140 people, that I think was probably the moment where I started to let go of actually, I've run big pieces of business, but I've actually also been a leader within a business, and that was something that I also love. So I think that was maybe the time where I put my energy back more into other people.
Yeah.
Rather than feeling like I still kind of needed to prove myself. And I think it's probably quite liberating, if that makes sense, in terms of just letting go. I just think as you get older, you just don't care what people think as much, do you? Yeah.
But I do find sometimes it's weird. I kind of go, yeah, I don't have that story anymore. I've moved on. And I'm like, oh, it's crept in today. I think as soon as I'm expanding my comfort zone or suddenly doing something that's new, suddenly that little bit of, I need to prove myself again comes in. Yeah. Rather than, no, come on, look at the evidence, look what you've done, you know how to do it. And I think it's all that healthy self-talk to go, that story is your past.
Yes.
Not who you are today.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think, but it is a journey in learning.
It is a journey. And I think, the journey still continues. I mean, I've now been a CEO for a year, and, I'm sure there's moments where I go, goodness, have I done everything in that first year that I wanted to? Not in a have I proved myself way, but I think I'm naturally restless and I naturally challenge myself. So I think I'm sometimes harder on myself than I should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm guessing a lot of people listening going, me too.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of very ambitious people, I do think sometimes they are successful because they are that little bit harder themselves. So I think sometimes it can be negative, but also a real positive to drive to get what you want to achieve.
Yes.
And when you said just now, like you're running a department of 140 people, that's a lot of people, especially within one, some companies, aren't that big in the agencies. That's a massive department. What was it like for you suddenly going from running accounts and businesses to 140 people you're now responsible for?
I think, it's one of those interesting things where it is a big shift. And I think actually often we just expect people to step into those roles. And actually there's not always a huge amount of training actually to help you get there. But I think I'm naturally a people person. I think, I believe that we're in a people business, and I think it's all about getting to the best talent and nurturing it. So it was a role that I sort of naturally really enjoyed. And I think it was forever changing. I think the thing it probably taught me the most is often I thought that everybody would want a similar path to me or would often look for the same career journey. And I think it actually taught me really early on that different things make different people tick, and how much, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason, because I think it really taught me a lot of listening skills that I think are invaluable even now today, to be honest.
Yeah, and I had breakfast with Nishma this morning, and she worked at Google, and someone at the breakfast just said, what is the one thing you valued most about the agencies you worked with, the leaders you worked with? You said, listening.
Yeah.
Actually someone to listen to what you need and what you want. And I think in leadership, unfortunately, I think it's quite an underrated skill.
Yes.
We don't take it that seriously, the impact just to listen to someone has.
Yeah. And I think, I definitely think that's where I honed a lot of my listening skills. And I think there's real joy for me in terms of seeing people succeed and thrive. And often when people left, I would see that as a sign of success. If they went off to another great agency, it was almost like, I sort of always like this phrase, we sort of were always borrowing talent, and actually it's about nurturing it. And when people went off to another great agency, I felt like I'd actually done my job well, if that made sense, rather than seeing it as a negative.
Yeah. And I think that builds, because again, there's lots of leaders that actually do take it quite personally. What have I done wrong for them to leave? I can't remember his name, and it'll come to me. But there's a great leader. He's got the whole company. It's very open of, we are growing you, but when you're ready to go, we know you're not going to stay.
Yeah.
See his face, I can't think of his name, it's really annoying me. But it's very open that is their mantra.
Yeah.
So rather than just kind of, got to hold on to everyone all the time, the whole thing, change and variety is good for you, and we just want to be part of that journey.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you feel going from running accounts to taking on 140 people, what sort of pressure comes with that?
I think a lot of pressure, because I think in truth it was a dual role. So I still had all those client demands, and I had then the demands of the internal kind of department. And I think often the challenge of that is the emotion that I think comes with running that department, and you feel like you are sort of responsible and don't want to let people down, and they're right there in front of you, often sort of queuing out your door to see you. And I think I learnt probably the hard way early on that I had to learn how to not take everything home with me at night, and that you can't solve everybody's problems, and actually it's not really often for you to solve them all. And I think it was trying to work out how you can support, where you can add value, where you can change things, but also being with the zen with the fact that not everyone's going to love you and you can't solve all those problems, I think was a big kind of, again, a learning curve that I went through.
And allow yourself to breathe. And
yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot, actually, because you've made me think of a question that you didn't know I was going to ask.
Okay.
Got it. Is thinking that the way you're navigating that. There's something I'm concerned with at the moment is looking at how much is expected of leaders today. You've got to run the business, you've got to make profit, you've got to look after your clients, you've got to look after your team. All of that was standard. In the world today, you now need to be very aware of mental health challenges, generation gaps, and the differences that people, what you can and can't say anymore. Making sure you've got diversity and inclusion. I was on training the other day, so they've got to understand the menopause, you've got to understand endometriosis, you've got to understand all the different paternity. But what's your view on what's now being asked of from leaders? And do you think it's sustainable?
I think there's always been demands on leaders. Maybe they have evolved over time. And I think it's probably more social complexity now than there maybe has been before. But I suppose I sort of come from a point of view of, you have to start with your own mental health, being a bit selfish about it. And I think one of the things I have learned over time as a leader is I used to kind of run and then sort of fall over. And I think I've got much better around my own triggers of knowing myself about when I'm reaching that sort of burnout. I think that's a really, really important thing, because that's the moment where I know I need to just, whether it's time out or do something for myself that weekend or not work that night, even if it feels pressing. And I think if you can get your own equilibrium right, that just helps you then be a better leader. And again, I think it's something I've learned rather than been taught about my own self, and everyone has different triggers. But I definitely think that helps in terms of trying to find the balance, because there are a lot of demands. I think that's fair to say.
And I think a lot of them have come from COVID. Something that's all entering each other's lives a lot. I'm just seeing more and more expectations on businesses. And I'm going to go as bold to say, and I'm happy if people want to disagree with me, but as bold to say is, I feel like some leaders, you're feeling like you're almost parenting in a way. There's and I'm just curious to go, where's that line going to be?
Yeah.
Because I am just worried, and the people I talk to, more and more people are like, why would I want to be a leader? It's seen as like, woof. I don't want to do what you have to deal with. And it's like, I'm just worried that, is it realistic what's now being asked?
I mean, I think I'm an inherent people person. So I think I actually do love that element of it. I think it's back to the not carrying everything on your shoulders. And I think often it's about making sure you have the right leadership team or support team around you, potentially often with different skill sets or different passion points that can lean into some of those harder topics as well. I think one of the things we're not experts in is everything. And so often I think it's playing to different people's strengths to solve different sort of problems with our people or things. And I think it comes back to also setting standards. So I'm sure we'll come on and talk about this a bit more, but I'm quite passionate about work-life balance. And, I've got 2 small kids. I think you have to also set out that way of working at the top down. So that's not about being parental or sort of parent-child in terms of how we approach, how we work with people. But I do think you have to live what you breathe, and you've got to sort of live what you preach, so to speak. So I think it's really important, if you're going to talk about flexible working or core hours, that then actually all of your leadership team actually do that, because I don't come into the office till 10 o'clock because our core hours are 10 till 4. Whereas if I'm at my desk every day at 8:30, it's not practical with 2 kids. But then everybody else thinks, well, maybe I need to be in at 8:30. So I think it's about trying to kind of set a style or leadership sort of way of working that does feel a bit more sustainable for everybody, if that makes sense.
I think and it can be adaptable for the individuals and their needs. And I like the idea of, covering not relying it all from one person, but how you cover the basis within the organisation.
Yeah.
So I'd love to then know more about your work-life balance. What was the driver to make sure that was put in place?
I think it's probably, in truth, I look back at my time at A&V, and it's when I didn't have kids until towards the very end of it. And I look back at it and I now think, I don't know how they all did it. I don't know how they were all in the office 5 days a week and had, 1, 2, 3 kids at home. And my honest conclusion is I don't think they probably saw a lot of their kids a lot of the time. And I think I made a really active decision that I, selfishly wanted to be able to do both. I wanted to have the career and, a big job, but I don't want to, in 5 years' time, look back and think I missed out on putting my kids to bed. So I think I've created, my own expectations of myself, but also what I'm going to give and not give in order to kind of make it work. And I think the flexible working and core hours and things like that have just made it post-COVID so much more manageable. And I think the one thing that COVID did, which was amazing for everybody, is it just kind of gave that keyhole into everybody's lives in a way that I just don't think we ever even thought about people's kids. Whereas, I'll be honest, on a Friday, occasionally the kids are going to come home and I'll have one on my lap as I finish up my calls. But I just think that's just part of that work-life blend. And I'm really zen with that. And I think I'm very unusual in that my leadership team, actually a lot of us have young kids, and I think it's been really healthy that they pop up on a Monday morning meeting and are on a lap and whatever. I just think, isn't that the richness of our lives? We're all multi-dimensional, and I kind of love that.
I think it's just such a warmth. It's like I was interviewing someone the day, and the child just popped to the door and it's like, hi.
Yeah.
Cool. And it's that really humanising everything we do and normalising that we've all got lives outside of our working environment. In terms, I'm just curious because I know people are still, navigating hybrid working, testing lots of things. You said core hours, you say flexible working. So the core hours, is that 10 till 4?
Yeah, so we do Monday and Fridays work from home.
Yeah.
And then we're in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. But on those days, our core hours are 10 till 4, so that we wouldn't normally have in-person meetings in the office till after 10 o'clock and then again at 4 o'clock. So it's just design. I'm not saying that we can all just do 10 till 4. That's probably not realistic of our jobs. But I do think it allows people to do drop-offs or pick-ups or go to the gym. It's not just about parents. I think sometimes we forget that everybody needs work-life balance. Also, lots of people might be carers for older parents and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's just trying to create permission, but in an empowering way rather than a kind of a patronising way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. I think it's lovely. And I'd love to know for you, going from being, a senior leader without children to now leading with children, what's been the main changes for you in how you've had to adapt your leadership?
I think the biggest thing, if I'm honest, is kids just bring you perspective. And I think they've probably taught me about what really matters. And I think they make you really smart around your time, because back to the thing, for me, it is about quality time, not quantity time. I think I'm just really focused in on, making sure I've got family time and work time. And that means being super efficient, in truth, about what I am and aren't going to do. And I think my list changed from a will-do list, from a to-do list to a will-do list, which I think is quite interesting. Because a to-do list just goes on and on and on, whereas a will-do list, it's like, I have to do that today. And, it's a mindset thing, I think, almost.
I'm taking that straight away from this one, changing to a will-do. Well, must do today, can do tomorrow. It's kind of really nice. So in terms of what in your leadership then, so I think it's wonderful what you achieved. I want to come to your transition to CEO. Just taking a step back in terms of your time at AMV and with 140 people, what you were doing, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced in your career that actually going through them have helped you become who you are today?
I think, well, it's interesting actually, because I think at AMV, I was surrounded by incredible people for a very long time. And I think actually in hindsight, I took a lot of that for granted. I think I didn't realise at the time how much I was learning about different leadership styles and about how to look after your people and about the importance of culture and all those things. And I think it was interesting because I'll be honest and say, I think when I didn't leave AMV probably the way I thought I would. And in truth, that's because I felt like the leadership and the culture had changed. And it wasn't until it had sort of evolved and morphed into something that I didn't really feel was me anymore that I realised how important those things were. So I think that's probably, again, one of the biggest sort of learnings I had coming into a new agency was, first of all, it's all about the people. So when I moved to Mullen Lowe, it's because I really loved the people that I met. And I felt like if you start with that, then you can kind of build out anything.
And I think that culture, because I think for me, I've always had such lovely cultures. And then my last agency gig was such a nasty culture and it was shocking. Yeah. I didn't even know this existed and it could be that bad. But yeah, it can actually change you as a person.
Yeah. And I think I know I'm at my best when I'm in I talk about high challenge, high support. That I think is when I know I'm at my best, because I think I wouldn't fare well in really toxic environments. It's just not me. And I think have reached that stage, I'd call it out and I would be driving change within those types of cultures. But I think when you're lower down in the ranks, that's very difficult to do. So I think I lucked out at AMV in that it was nice, but it wasn't a warm bath. It had edge to it and it had energy to it, and people found constructive ways to challenge and poke and whatever. And that for me is when you get to that high support, high challenge thing, where it's like creating safe environments where people can ask the difficult questions or push back on things, but it's taken very much in a spirit of collaboration and conversation rather than sort of confrontation, if that makes sense.
There's a thing, isn't it? If your people you're leading can't disagree with you, you've got a lot of work to do.
Yes.
There's sort of fundamentally wrong with your culture. If you're going into a room and everyone's quiet, and in their heads they're going, what is she talking about?
Yeah.
But they can't say that actually probably not a good sign.
Yeah, agree.
And I think too many leaders might go, oh, good, all aligned, everyone agreed. It's like,
actually nobody said anything.
Corridor conversations.
And back to the listening thing of it means you're not actually listening, because if nobody's saying anything, that's even more of a problem.
Which is, building some psychological safety.
Yeah.
It is very, very important. Have there been any other challenges for you in your career that in terms of, especially going from now MD to CEO, what was that like choosing to now become a CEO?
I think probably one of the biggest challenges for me was that transition actually from A&V to Mullen Lowe, because it was a funny old time for everybody, right? It was COVID. But I'd been at A&V for nearly 14 years. I was pregnant with my second. I think having babies in COVID was quite weird anyway, sort of being in lockdown. So people didn't even know I was pregnant until I sort of would stand up, and then having a baby in lockdown. But when I took the role at Mullen Lowe, actually my littlest Kits was only 9 months. And I hadn't stepped in an agency for 2.5 years that first day that I showed up. And it was, I had a 3-year-old, a 9-month-old. I hadn't been in an office for 2.5 years. It was a new agency, new role. And I feel I was generous. I would say it was plucky. But there was definitely moments where I thought, my goodness, what have I done? This feels a lot. But I think it's one of those funny things where it came back to I'd found the right group of people. And actually that's kind of what made it all good, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Do you have some key coping strategies for when, like, if overwhelm comes into you or if you feel nervous? Do you have some things that you do that help?
I mean, something that a lot of people probably wouldn't know about me is that I have really battled with public speaking and presenting. It's something everybody just expects us to be able to do. And I think there's a lot of people in our industry that are extroverts, or those annoyingly people that either love presenting or are very funny when they present. And I'm not either of those. And I think it took me a long time to find my style and my own confidence around presenting. So I think in terms of coping strategies, that's probably the space I've had to spend the most time coaching myself around, if that makes sense, because for too many years I had an avoidance tactic of, well, it's way better if the creatives present the work, which, by the way, it usually is. But I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was bringing them into the room because I didn't want to present, not because actually they were going to present the work better. So I think, whereas, when I got into Mullen Lowe and suddenly you're the MD and now the CEO, you have to be able to do those big set pieces and be quite comfortable doing it. So I think that's probably the biggest journey that I've been on. And a lot of people that even know me very closely wouldn't probably have expected me to talk about that, if that makes sense.
No, I was quite surprised.
Yeah.
Even I know this is one of your first podcasts you've done, very comfortable, very natural. So yes, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly common that people worry about doing it and getting on the stage. Something you said in terms of getting comfortable doing it. Do you feel you are comfortable doing that, or is it still you just learn to live with the nerves? You've learned to live with.
I've definitely learned to live with it.
Yeah.
I maybe there'll be one day where I love presenting, but it's definitely something that I still the night before think, oh, I've got this big thing to do tomorrow. But it's one of those funny things where I think it's often the beginning that I feel nervous, and then once I'm up and going, I'm absolutely fine. Yeah.
I had a thing because I do a big event every year. My voice croaks when I start, and I just had to. And that, funny enough, when I accepted that that's what's going to happen, it stopped happening. Yeah. Rather than worrying about trying to make it not happen, it's just like the croak, and I'm like, it's all right, it'll be fine in a minute. Let's go. And now we're fine. But it's just knowing all the little nuances.
Yes. And I think that, different people do it different ways. I'm not somebody that I can ad-lib to a degree, but I'm not good with no script. Yeah. Equally, I can't just read from a script. I need to be more natural from that. So again, I think it's taken me practice about working out how I feel prepped and prepared, if that makes sense, and what sort of coping mechanisms, if you like, that I sort of need. But yeah.
The one I do, my poor husband has to listen to me say all my stuff out loud.
Same. That's the main thing that I think I do. I go in a room before I go out to the agency and just say out loud what I'm going to say.
And it's so important because so often you write your presentations and then you say it out loud and you're like, oh, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So anyone just doing one, you've always got to say it out loud. Yeah. Your flow changes, what you're going to, everything. And then you realise you haven't got enough stories. So yeah, very, very important. But thanks for sharing that. I think that help a lot of people go, oh, okay, that's quite normal then. Still be quite senior.
Yeah.
And, finding that is quite a fear to do. Well, for you, been in the industry a long time, What for you would you like to see change in the industry? What do you think still needs to get tackled?
I think actually one of the biggest things, and this has actually been, as an agency, we've actually talked about this quite a bit, is ageism. We did a big project called The Invisible Powerhouse, which was all about identifying the fact that the over 50s are invisible. And that was more, to be honest, about how brands behave and comms and those sort of things. But I think actually when we did that project, it brought out a real truth within our own industry about the fact, where is everybody over 50? And as somebody in their kind of early 40s, I'm next gen. And I'm looking up, and the truth is there aren't that many role models or just people over 50, and I think it's just not talked about enough. And I feel incredibly privileged that at the moment I do work with some people that are over 50, and I think they bring a huge amount of value and knowledge and experience that, if we're not careful, is just going to sort of evaporate out of our industry. And I would be, I find it terrifying that I could only have, 6-7 years left. That feels crazy. But yes, it feels like it's sort of a bit swept under the carpet at the moment in terms of why is that happening? Where is everybody going? Why are they going? And what does it actually mean in terms of the expertise exiting our building? So many other professions, it feels like you're reaching your prime by that stage. Where somehow we've reached a split space where I think a lot of that expertise just isn't valued.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like my stepfather works in oil, and he's now, late 70s. I won't give his complete age away. But he's so in demand in what he does. It's so respected, the years and the wisdom and the expertise that he can bring, and the credibility. Like, the clients want him in the room because of his knowledge. And there's something there's become like a running joke. And it was me. I did 20 years in advertising and left. It's like, right, you do your 20 years and you can't do anymore. Actually, can you physically work those hours anymore, and the expectations and the pace? So is it a case of any more than 20 years, it's just, I've got to get out. It's been too intense, too much. Like, my stepdad thinks it's crazy how the agencies worked and the hours and everything. He's like, well, no, I probably would have done the same if that's how I had to work. And then I've also got a lot of friends, and also a lot of male people in their 50s, even more, go, just don't feel relevant anymore.
Yeah.
I don't, because I'm not on TikTok, I'm not on this. And it's like how they stay relevant or is perceived to not be relevant.
Yeah. I think part of it is perception. I also think, in truth, particularly as next generation coming through, we have grown up with quite a digital world, and dare I say it, I'm on TikTok, going into a black hole on TikTok. So I think that helps probably this next generation coming through, because I think we have grown up with it. But yeah, I just think it would be a travesty if, lots of my peers kind of leave. And I think it's really interesting, because I do think there is a whole new generation of, if I look at now sort of a lot of the CEOs across London, there's probably more female CEOs across the agencies than there's ever been, which is amazing. But it will be really interesting to see what happens to our generation next, if that makes sense, because it's not that we're trailblazers, but I just think it's set a different precedent in terms of back to the flexible working and balance and all those things. It will be interesting to see how that evolves and whether that makes it more sustainable or not.
Yeah, no, I could agree. And someone said to me recently, this is the first time ever, I'm hoping I get this right, that we are now having 5 different generations in an organisation.
Yeah, wow.
The lead. And have you found your need to become more adaptable now in terms of how quite different? Because I think, when I was in it, the generational gap wasn't that different, but the generational gap now is wider than I think it's ever been. Are you noticing you're needing to be more adaptable with the different people you're leading now and the challenges with having 5 different generations?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's back to my point earlier around, I think part of us trying to set people up for success and get to, actually creating an environment where lots of different types of people can thrive. I think that is the demands of, people in their 50s with parents who might well be in their 70s, 80s. That has its demands just as small children does, just as actually new people coming up the ladder and, trying to work out how they can possibly afford to live and work in London, and are often in quite challenging living conditions and all those sorts of things. So yes, I definitely think there's more complexity in that cross-generational thing, but also isn't that brilliant?
More learning.
More, but also more perspective, more life experience, more back to the, we're all about creativity and ideas. Surely we're going to get to a more interesting idea if we've got 5 generations talking about something than 1 or 2.
Yeah. And I think that's a lovely way to embrace it. And I find it quite amusing. And I can get caught up in this trap sometimes. The music where we suddenly go, oh, but they don't work like we did. And they do that. And I think it's that choice of how you choose to look at it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Or look at it as a frustration, or they're not like me, or they do things differently. And I think it's the lens that you're going to approach it in terms of how successful you can be with it and embrace the opportunity. I'd love to know, I've covered so many different topics here, it's brilliant. But what I'd love to know is, what would you like to pass on to your younger self?
Oh, goodness. I think, do you know what? I think I'd actually say it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And actually just be kind to yourself. I think back to that early conversation about, having to prove yourself. I think that definitely created a sprint mentality in me, which wasn't sustainable. And I think I was hard on myself. And I think particularly, lots of working mums, I think often we're not very kind to ourselves about actually we're doing a bloody good job keeping families up and running, kids up and running, work up and running, etc. So I think that's probably what I would say.
That's really nice. You just made me think, could that prove yourself? Because something you said earlier where you would run and then burn. That was exactly the same pattern I did.
Yeah.
I'd run for 3 months and then I'd burn. And then I'd chill out for about 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm not going to do that again. And then I'd run and burn again. And my husband was just like, you can't keep doing this. You've got to sort this story you've got about yourself. And it was that really breaking that pattern, as you said. Be kind to yourself. It's not healthy. It's not sustainable.
No. And it's not good for work. I don't think you bring your best self to work, and you definitely don't bring your best self to home. So I think that would probably be what I
enjoy the process, because I've probably got another 20 years working.
I know. Well, this is the thing.
Enjoy it. What am I rushing? What am I trying to rush to?
Yeah.
I take it easy. And is there anything, I just want to give you the opportunity, anything we've not covered or anything you're really passionate about that you'd like to share with Andy?
I don't think there is. I feel like we've covered loads of ground.
So is it?
Yeah.
We went all the way through. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute joy. And congratulations on everything you do as CEO of Mullen Lowe.
Oh.
Very excited to see where it goes. I'm very excited. And I know Anna's listening to this now. Can we have core hours of 10 till 4, please? I think it's very inspired.
Oh.
But thank you so much. And thank you for everyone listening. And we'll see you next week. If you've been loving our Courageous Leaders podcast, please can I ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the quality content coming and reach listeners like you that we can then really, really help. We fund this podcast ourselves, so to have your support means that we can keep delivering week on week. Thank you.